At its sitting on the 14th of March 2023, the House of Keys will elect 4 members of the Legislative Council. MHKs will want to elect the best people for the job, although it's not always clear what that job entails. Following the 2021 general election, 2 Legco seats became available and one was filled by Diane Kelsey. Mrs Kelsey has been relatively quiet since she was elected, so what does she stand for and what does she make of her new role? I began by asking Mrs Kelsey why did she want to be an MLC?
I think because I love the Isle of Man, I wanted to do something for the Isle of Man, and I'd worked previously in the UK in the armed forces, but I'd grown up on the Isle of Man. My family is linked with the Isle of Man directly or indirectly, and it's actually the only constant in my life apart from my close family. So I got to that stage, I'm in my 50s, and I wanted to do something, I'd love to say greater, but that sounds very pompous, but I just wanted to do something wider and actually help the island progress, but also support people who perhaps need supporting, and also, as an MLC, be able to scrutinise laws, in my mind, to make sure they're understandable by everybody. So laws for the people rather than for the politicians.
And has the role been any different to what you would have expected? I mean, what? I mean, inevitably it will have been. So maybe if we start with what is different? What did you not expect from this?
I think I didn't expect so much teamwork. I think because we tend to get a snapshot of politics when we're either listening to the radio or even just generally reading the papers and being around about. But actually, they're actually a really good bunch of people who genuinely want to work together. Sometimes they'll differ, but they want to work together for the good of the Isle of Man. And I actually didn't expect to see that quite so firmly as I've seen it. I've even when people are disagreeing with each other, it's always about the Isle of Man as opposed to about them, which is really important to me. And
I suppose part of the role of being a politician is being able to make deals and work with colleagues this is one of the I suppose the beauties and disadvantages at the same time of the political system we have, that you don't have that sort of not bipolar, what's the word? Polarized.
Yes.
That's the one. You don't have that polarized situation that you have certainly in English politics, and possibly in other parts of the UK as well. The whole nature of how politics works on the Isle of Man means that we or politicians have to work together. Indeed, and I think that's what's really good about the Isle of Man, is because we're not firmly a party politics, and therefore there's not that polarisation or somebody else's agenda. It might be individuals' agenda, it may be small groups of people, but essentially we have to work together, otherwise nothing will ever get done. So I'm really heartened to say that we might be the oldest continuous parliament in the world, but I'd actually go to say that we're probably one of the most mature in our thinking as well, because we have to collaborate, and that's what democracy is all about. And I suppose then the obvious question, you've witnessed the first year of the Cannon administration. Are they doing a good job? Are there things that they could do better? What would be your assessment on them? I think they're doing a good job, and I suppose the listener would say, well, she would say that, wouldn't she? I think they're doing a good job. They're being ambitious, they're being bold. Some of the things that the government are trying to do are things that probably previous administrations have tried to do, but perhaps a springboard coming out of COVID and also Brexit consumed some of the last administration. There's a bit more freedom now. Obviously, things of February, the events of February, and the illegal invasion by Russia of a sovereign state of Ukraine have made a difference, and therefore what's been heartening is to see how fleet of foot our administration has been able to be to support people on the Isle of Man who are vulnerable, people on the Isle of Man who may not be that vulnerable, but to keep some sort of stability, but also to support those people fleeing from conflict. Again, it sounds all a bit hearts and flowers, but essentially I think they've done a really good job given what they were hoping to get done, and actually what they've managed to achieve. They've been able to shift the balance when they've needed to, but there's still an awful lot to do, and I know that the ambitions are still very high. Critics might say that there's a lot of talk gone on and lots of bold initiatives and strategies announced. Is there much by way of delivery, do you think?
Yes, I mean, on Tuesday in Tynwald, there was the energy efficiency scheme that has rolled out. It's not going to be earth-shattering to any individual, but it's going to make a difference to people who really do need some support to keep their bills down, and more importantly, this mantra of the cheapest item of energy is the one you don't use. So if we can insulate lofts, if we can put draft exclusives, and the DEFRA team have come forward with some really, really good measures and targeted to people who actually need that help, not just people who would like the help. It's about need. So there's one, and that was only this week. I say we delivered support to Ukrainian refugees. We have delivered our island plan. I say we, the government, the administration, but I go back to it feels like a team effort. Delivered the our island plan, and more importantly, keep reviewing it. And then the economic strategy, which is very, very bold, but actually puts quite a lot of that stuff into place. Do I agree with everything that's written down? Absolutely not. But does that mean that I can't work with it across the board? Yes. And I think, it's back to for the best for the people of the Isle of Man and our future and our children's future. I've got two teenage children, and I would love them to feel the same about the Isle of Man the way I do, and even if they go off for some work in their early years, come back and actually be part of our community with their families in the future.
And in terms of that plan, we were told that Tynwald members all had some level of say in its development. Did you feel that you were being listened to by the government?
I suppose, unfortunately, because I was so new and there was quite a steep learning curve, even though I thought I could sort of walk in from my background, that at least could start walking, or if not a comfortable trot. There was an awful lot to take on board. So if we were start again now, I'd probably want a little bit more input. Would I be worried whether all that input was taken on board and manifested it in the plans? No, because again, I go back to this collaboration, democracy, and it is about sometimes compromise, but more importantly about working together. So I'd say broadly, because it's a living plan and not something in aspect that's going to stay what it is of 12 months, 6 months or 2 months ago, there's some really good stuff in there. And I would really, really urge anybody who feels there's something they want to say about it, just get in touch with your MHK or write direct to the Chief Minister to say what you would like to see in the future. It should be our plan. It's not a bunch of politicians' plan. It's for the Isle of Man.
And as far as you're concerned, are there any, well, there must be some elements that you would have liked to have seen in the plan that aren't in there.
It's really difficult because I think there's some really good seeds in there. So I'd say there's nothing that I would like to see that isn't mentioned in some way. Certainly nothing of significant consequence. But I think the key thing for me that I'm quite ambitious for the island for the innovation. And I don't just mean a load of people coming and put a load of money in the Isle of Man. I'm actually talking about good ideas that we can play around with and maybe deliver some stuff in the future. And unfortunately, we have to accept that some of those are going to fail. And I think we should be ambitious enough to say we would have some sort of R&D think tank thing. Now, it sounds very highfalutin, but it doesn't need to cost a great deal of money. There's some brilliant minds out there on the Isle of Man, and we should be listening to their ideas and accepting some of them may fall at the first hurdle, second or third. But that's not a bad thing, because if you don't try, we'll always stay where we are, if not going backwards, which is the danger. So it's about innovation and grasping those ideas, especially from young people, but it could be from anyone. It doesn't matter. It's just saying, OK, let's have a look at that. Would that work? How would that work? How would we make it work? Actually, can we talk to you about it? Because we think you're on the right lines, but we'd like to understand a bit more because it doesn't quite fit with our legislation. And actually have a very open, but go back to talk, but actually then start playing with these things, seeing what can be delivered, and then seeing what could actually make a difference to our future.
And in terms of government, I mean, do you think that government's perfect, or are there things that already are starting to frustrate you about the way in which government operates?
Well, we all work with, cope with government because we're all residents of the Isle of Man. No, government's not perfect because none of us are. I often say I make a mistake, if not every day. It's probably several hours of every day I make mistakes. I'll probably make mistakes whilst we're chatting today. But it almost goes back to the previous point I was making about innovation and ideas. I genuinely believe if the government don't try some of these things, and we all are mature enough to accept that some of them may fail, but actually do your due diligence, make sure we're not being taken for a ride, but sometimes take an honest and transparent chance on things, but be really honest with everybody, whether it's cost of in money or time or people, because you need to bring people in, which also costs money. How can we make things better without actually trying a few things out? So is government perfect? No, because they'll be trying things out that don't quite work. Is that a good thing? Yes, absolutely.
Is the system, though, capable of being innovative? And I would point to the debate that took place in December, Tynwald, in relation to the brownfield site development grant. And the Minister, I think quite rightly, possibly with several voices of experience talking in his ear, pointed to the need to be flexible. Having been there and tried to develop brownfield sites in different guises in Council of Ministers myself, I know that you need a pretty healthy dose of flexibility to get things done. And yet, at Tynwald, part of Tynwald's role is to scrutinise everything that government does, and several, particularly MHKs, spoke with quite a lot of concern about that scheme because it was so flexible. And of course it's very difficult to hold government to account if you've introduced a scheme which allows them pretty much to do whatever they like. So how is there an inevitable problem there that government's never going to be getting the flexibility it needs because of the need for scrutiny?
The need for scrutiny should never go away, and I think even government departments need to scrutinise what they're doing and also what their teams are doing or on their behalf. But there's also got to be elements of trust. So we're small enough and we're compact enough and we're close enough to actually feel that things cannot go too far off the rails, because some things will, as I said, can't go too far off the rails before we can actually say, actually, no, that's wrong. We're going to stop that now. And the great thing about the Isle of Man, in the same way that we can start things relatively quickly because we're small and we can meet or we can do things ex committee, we can also stop things if something's going wrong. So I heard what was, I was listening very intently. I'm always very, very keen on listening to debates in Tynwald. I'm not a big contributor to the debates at the moment, but some of that is newness. But also I'll speak when I've got something that will add as opposed to just complement the debate. And I think all those voices needed to be heard. Some of the points can be addressed very easily, and it's just either a misunderstanding or the information isn't all out there or wasn't available early enough for people to look at. But I think people's concerns are quite right. But that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't do stuff, and we should take on. It goes back to what I was saying, even if it's members of the public, if we've got ideas or thoughts and you're as well informed as you can make yourself, I think there's no reason why you shouldn't have a part to say, and people should listen to you and then explain what they are or aren't going to do with your information. And that sort of goes back when we do these consultations. So how do we put that scheme, the brownfield scheme, out for consultation? I'm fairly certain we would have had a broad spectrum of comments in, and then the government department would have gone back, the DfE in this case, but it's cross-government really. But DfE would have gone back and said, OK, we listened. These are things we have taken on board, and this is what we're going to do about it. But there will always be people, and I'm not talking about my colleagues in Tynwald at this stage, but there will always be people who are not happy no matter what you do. So actually we have to sometimes be a little bit brave, if not very brave, but not reckless. And I think that's the difference. Taking your chance is one thing, but it should be a calculated and understandable risk, and you should know when you need to switch it off. And that's possibly the bit we're not as good at, is the switching off if something's not quite right.
In terms then of contributions, you said there that you're not a big contributor in Tynwald. I note that having attended now one Legislative Council sitting and been reviewing several over the past few months, there aren't any questions asked in Legislative Council. Well, first of all, what would you say about the difficulty being relatively inexperienced in terms of politics? It's quite a daunting thing, isn't it, getting up and speaking in Tynwald?
It is, especially if you're not speaking just to be heard, just to be seen, to be speaking. I think being thoughtful and actually putting something in, even if it's completely opposite to what everybody else is saying, knowing that you're adding to a debate, not just echoing what other people have said. I think the other thing is, despite this idea that we have secret meetings and have other things, we do talk to each other outside. This idea that we only turn up in Douglas on a Tuesday for either our chamber sittings or for Tynwald Court. People are working really, really hard. They're meeting, they're chatting. No decisions are being made unless it's at departmental level or just personal decisions. Parliamentary decisions are very much the only place they take place are in the tricameral system, and certainly in Tynwald Court. But informing oneself, making sure you've got as much information as possible, asking the questions, and actually, for me, that's where I get most of my information from. That's where I make most of my decisions. However, what's really nice is that I'll still sit and listen to a debate and suddenly think, oh, actually, that's something I hadn't considered. Is that going to change the way I'm going to vote? So nothing is decided, but people are as well informed as they can be. And quite rightly, that's what the public should expect of us. So, yes, it's daunting to stand up and speak, but I think I should only speak when I've got something useful to say.
I suppose, though, the other side to Tynwald, I mean, yes, it is important, and perhaps some members don't appreciate that actually Tynwald is a debating chamber, and if you can deliver a really good speech, you could potentially sway opinion that you think may be already set in advance, because the unfortunate aspect of the briefings that go on, a lot of the debate happens behind closed doors, so it doesn't need to happen when it gets to Tynwald. And possibly part of the role that Tynwald sittings plays is that the public get to understand the behind the scenes thinking that's gone on, and maybe members who are sitting there thinking, well, I've got nothing else to add. Actually, there are people who don't actually know what you think, and you are effectively paid to be a national politician. So, I've gone through both sides of this during my time in Tynwald. I know it's a difficult one to get the balance right with.
No, you're completely right, and I take that point. I suppose a briefing is useful, even a conversation in a corridor or a meeting at a departmental board. I sit on the Cabinet Office board. I'm Vice Chair of the Isle of Man Post Office. I do Armed Forces. I'm the Armed Forces champion for the government. And so quite often there's things you discuss outside of Tynwald. And some of those things are not even going to go to Tynwald anyway. It's about shaping things way before or way after. But you're quite right. And I think probably over time, my courage to not perhaps ask all of the questions in advance, or ask the same question to make sure it's on the record on Hansard, and that I think will come with more experience. I've spoken 2 or 3 times and I'm comfortable with that. But you asked about questions, and that's quite interesting to me because, again, as a new person, a year in, because I haven't seen questions in Legco, and we only a few questions from Legco within Tynwald, it doesn't feel as significant a role of what we do, because actually we're scrutinising once things are starting to develop and be decided. So when it comes to legislation, that's when Legco in particular, but any member of Tynwald, can really start asking those questions and really understanding what's going on. And those things are happening in a debate in our chambers, and then by the time it gets to Tynwald, quite often the separate chambers have already had that debate. So when it comes to legislation, I feel very heartened that there's an awful lot of scrutiny, a lot of cooperation and compromises where necessary. But more importantly, some good legislation is starting to come through. And maybe at the start of an administration, you'll know better than me, it was the start of an administration. And there's lots of things you want to do and get on the table. The legislation now is starting to come through quite thick and fast. And it's fascinating to be involved, and more importantly, really important to scrutinise what's coming through, because unintended consequences of a few words in some legislation could have a dramatic effect on how we live and act around the island. So that's important to me. So I think it's a broad range, and you're quite right there. We shouldn't have debates in private, but I can assure you and the listeners, I'm not seeing it's a debate in private. It just might be a question to clarify something, better understanding, so you're better informed when you listen to the debate in Tynwald.
Any ambition to carry on in this role?
Absolutely, and certainly I'm hoping that I'll be standing for the elections in February, because although I've only done it for a year, I took the end part of one of the two MLCs who became MHKs. I took one of their seats, myself and Paul Crane MLC. So I will stand again in February, March time, and I want to stand because I want to carry on with what I'm doing, but more importantly, I feel that I'm now at that stage where, the rookie can be thrown out the door, and actually experienced politician will walk through, or there's a glide path, I suppose, rather than a switch overnight. So no, I will be standing in the elections in the spring.
And in terms of the election that will take place in 2026 for the House of Keys, you don't think you'll be following other LegCo members in that regard?
No, I don't have any ambitions. That doesn't mean to say that I don't want to serve the people of the Isle of Man, but I think the two roles are very different but complementary. I do believe LegCo members are there to support MHKs and the work they do for the public, but we're also there for the public of the Isle of Man and the residents of the Isle of Man. So, no, and I'm not even going to say famous last words. I don't have any aspirations to stand as an MHK.
If you were successful at the forthcoming LegCo election, what would be the one thing that we could pass judgment on to say Diane Kelsey MLC was a success over that 5 years spell?
Oh, over the 5 years, gosh, I've got. I'd like to see the development of the Isle of Man Post Office such that we're into a modern era. Postal services are changing, and we need to be more dynamic and think about how we can best support, while still understanding we live on a small island that needs community services. So working with government to see how we can develop that. So I'd like to see in 5 years' time that we have, a mature, successful Isle of Man Post Office, which may not look like the Isle of Man Post Office of today, but actually still serves the people of the Isle of Man. Ex-armed forces, 23 years in the Air Force. So, of course, I would also say that I'd like to make sure that the Armed Forces Covenant and covenants, because quite a lot of people have signed up to it, that there are no inequities for service currently serving, because we have reservists that are serving that live on the Isle of Man, and the old part-time territorial soldiers, but also lots of veterans, and also we've got our wonderful cadet forces that support young people across the Isle of Man, and the adult volunteers. So making sure that there's no unfairness in anything, there's equity in what they do, but also within the Cabinet Office, if I stay in the Cabinet Office, make sure those central functions that we're listening to what needs to be done across government and playing our part in that.
That was Diane Kelsey MLC. Do you think her quiet style of politics is effective, or would you prefer more outspoken politicians, even if they've not got much to say? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. For now, though, I'm Phil Gaughan. Guramayo. Thanks for listening.